What if one of the most powerful women in history was slowly killed, not by an assassin's blade, nor by war or betrayal, but by her mirror? Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, ruled England for 45 years with unmatched intellect, political mastery, and radiant iconography. Her face became a symbol painted white as porcelain crowned with flame-red hair adorned with blood-colored lips. But beneath the elegance and control lay a secret no one dared speak aloud, that the very image she worked tirelessly to perfect may have been silently poisoning her from the inside out. She died refusing an autopsy, leaving behind no medical confirmation, only whispers, symptoms, and scars that history has tried and failed to explain. In her final days, she was haunted not by foreign enemies or court conspiracies, but by the weight of sorrow, the ghosts of lost love, and a face that no longer belonged to her. This is not just a story about cosmetics or royalty. It's about the unbearable pressure to appear perfect, the lengths we go to hide our scars, and the cost of turning ourselves into symbols. The tragedy of Queen Elizabeth I is more than history. It's a mirror we still hold up to ourselves today. And what it reveals is as devastating now as it was then. She was England's most enduring monarch, and yet her death remains one of its most unsettling mysteries. On March 24, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I took her final breath alone in her private chambers, surrounded by silent shadows and servants too afraid to speak. No post-mortem was ever performed. No official cause of death was recorded. What remained was only rumor that she had grown frail, withdrawn, melancholic, that she refused to sleep for days, terrified that closing her eyes meant never waking, that she stood motionless for 15 hours at a time, propped up by cushions, silently unraveling in body and mind. But why? Why would a queen so powerful and intelligent fade away like this, without reason, without clarity? Historians have long speculated perhaps pneumonia, perhaps cancer, but others suggest a darker truth, one not found in medical records, but in her makeup. The thick white mask she wore, the scarlet lips, the powders and potions she trusted, they may have slowly poisoned her over decades. She died with a mirror beside her, yet no longer recognizing the face it reflected. The mystery of her death isn't just what killed her, it's why no one dared look closer. Elizabeth was born into chaos. The daughter of King Henry VIII and his doomed second wife, Anne Boleyn, she entered the world already marked by scandal. Her mother was executed when Elizabeth was just 2 years old, beheaded for treason and adultery, though history now sees the charges as political fiction. Branded illegitimate cast aside, she was raised in the shadows of court politics, too dangerous to trust, too royal to ignore. Yet she survived brilliantly. In 1558, after the early deaths of her half-brother Edward VI and her half-sister Mary, Elizabeth ascended the throne at age 25. The last surviving child of Henry VIII, she inherited a kingdom fractured by religious war, bankrupt from ambition, and wary of another monarch. But Elizabeth defied every expectation. She refused to marry, claimed England as her one true spouse, and forged a reign of stability and expansion that turned the country into a global force. Behind her legend, though, was a life shaped by early abandonment fear and the need to prove she belonged. Her father destroyed the women closest to him. Elizabeth would make sure no man ever had the chance to destroy her. But that armor came at a cost, and it would only grow heavier with time. From the moment she claimed the throne, Elizabeth understood that power wasn't just worn, it was performed. In a world ruled by men, where a woman's worth was measured by her youth, purity, and obedience, she constructed an image so commanding it became myth. She would be the Virgin Queen, untouched, eternal, divine. Suitors came from across Europe, kings and princes offering alliances and dynasties. But Elizabeth chose none of them. Instead, she chose control. If she married, she would be owned. If she bore children, she would be replaced. But so long as she remained unattached, she remained untouchable. Yet behind the crown and ceremony, time was quietly advancing. Her skin, once admired, began to carry the scars of age and illness. After surviving a brutal case of smallpox in 1562, Elizabeth was left with facial marks that no royal was supposed to have. the court whispered. She listened. And so the transformation began, not of the woman, but of her reflection. She coated her face in a thick layer of white paint, burying blemishes under illusion. This was no ordinary vanity. It was survival. Because in her world, a queen who aged became a queen in danger. And Elizabeth would never allow herself to appear weak. The year 1562 nearly ended her reign before it truly began. Struck by smallpox, a vicious, disfiguring killer of the 16th century, Elizabeth hovered between life and death for days. Against the odds, she survived, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Her once celebrated complexion was forever altered, left with pitted scars that no crown could hide. For a monarch whose power was so entwined with image, this was more than a cosmetic wound, it was a threat to her authority. In the court of Tudor England, appearance wasn't just presentation, it was politics. Nobles scrutinized her every detail. Enemies watched for signs of decay. And Elizabeth, already isolated by her refusal to marry, understood that her face had to remain a mask of perfection. That's when she turned to Venetian ceruse, a dazzling white cosmetic paste made of lead and vinegar. Applied thickly, it erased imperfections, restored an ethereal glow, and symbolized nobility. But it was also lethal. Modern science knows what Elizabeth did not, that lead seeps into the bloodstream, damaging organs, weakening muscles, and eroding the mind. What she believed was a shield was in truth a slow-working poison. But to maintain power in a man's world, she kept applying it layer by silent layer. She didn't just wear the paint, she lived behind it. As the years passed, Elizabeth's use of Venetian ceruse intensified. The more her skin deteriorated from the lead, the thicker the layers became. Her attendants described a queen who spent hours preparing herself, emerging not as a woman, but as a spectacle radiant, cold, almost inhuman. By the end of her life, it was said that her signature white mask was nearly an inch thick, cracking at the corners, hiding not only her scars but the reality of her decay. And yet she never let anyone see her without it. The mask had become her true face, the woman beneath it a memory. What began as a remedy had evolved into a prison. To make matters worse, Elizabeth rarely removed the makeup. Records suggest she applied it only once a week and wore it continuously in between. Day after day, the toxic paste baked into her skin, seeping deeper into her bloodstream with every passing hour. The very substance meant to preserve her beauty was dissolving her from the inside out. But in a world where age was weakness, where blemishes meant decline, she had no other choice. She chose the mask no matter the cost. Removing the mask was no gentler than wearing it. When Elizabeth finally allowed her attendants to cleanse her face, they did so using a mixture just as dangerous as the paint itself: crushed eggshells, vinegar, alum, and most disturbingly, mercury. In her time, mercury was believed to have purifying properties. In reality, it is a neurotoxin, one that corrodes tissue, damages the brain, and unravels the nervous system over time. As the queen aged, those around her began to notice subtle changes. Her mood darkened, her memory faltered, her movements slowed. What they attributed to old age may have been the silent creep of mercury poisoning. Her skin, already ravaged by lead, began to peel and flake, so she applied more ceruse to hide the damage, then more mercury to strip it away. It became a cruel cycle: paint to conceal, poison to remove, and each step dragging her body closer to collapse. But Elizabeth never stopped. She couldn't. In her world, to appear old was to appear finished. Her identity, her power was built on the illusion of immortality, and so she pressed on her body a battlefield, her face, the last territory she refused to surrender. But it wasn't only her skin that bore the burden of her illusion. It was her lips, too. Elizabeth was known for her striking crimson mouth, a visual signature as iconic as her white face and flame-red hair. To achieve that vivid hue, she turned to cinnabar, a brilliant red mineral prized in Elizabethan cosmetics. But cinnabar is mercury sulfide, another deadly compound. Every time she painted her lips, she was unknowingly layering on yet another form of slow destruction. And she didn't hold back. Reports suggest that by the end of her life, her lips were coated with nearly half an inch of this toxic pigment, sealed like lacquer over flesh that could no longer breathe. In that era, red lips were seen as more than beauty, they were talismanic. Some believed they could ward off illness, even death. Elizabeth, who feared decline more than anything, wore her lipstick like armor, a magic spell against time. But the charm failed her. Mercury coursed through her system, deepening her depression, clouding her mind, and further weakening her already fragile body. The very rituals meant to keep her radiant were now accelerating her ruin, yet still she clung to them because without them she wasn't the queen. She was just a woman, fading. By her final years, it wasn't just her body that was unraveling, it was her heart. Behind palace doors and powdered masks, Elizabeth was collapsing under the weight of grief. One by one, those closest to her disappeared. Her trusted lady-in-waiting, Catherine Howard, died. Then came the execution of Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, once her beloved favorite. Though he had rebelled against her, Elizabeth herself had signed the death warrant. When he was gone, something inside her broke. She withdrew from court life, spent long hours alone, and began weeping in private. Witnesses described her as distant, lost, and shrouded in what we would now call depression. But this wasn't simply sorrow. It was guilt mourning and isolation compounded over a lifetime. She had built an empire, outlasted rivals, and carved her name into history. Yet she had done so alone, without a partner, without children, without a true confidant who dared see past the crown. Her reign was built on invincibility, but inside she was haunted by regrets. She spoke often of Mary, Queen of Scots, another woman she had sent to her death. "I never truly consented," she whispered through tears. Her enemies had been silenced, but her ghosts were just beginning to speak. In the final weeks of her life, Queen Elizabeth refused to lie down, literally. She believed, perhaps superstitiously, perhaps instinctively, that if she rested, she would die. And so she remained on her feet for hours sometimes, as long as 15, until her legs gave way, and attendants had to surround her with pillows to keep her upright. Her silence grew more profound. She ate little, spoke less, and stared into nothing for long stretches, as if she were already drifting between worlds. Sleep, which once recharged her iron will, had become the enemy. Those around her grew desperate, but she resisted every effort to comfort or calm her. To recline, to close her eyes, was to surrender, and Elizabeth had never surrendered to anything in her life. Eventually, though, even she could no longer defy her body. On March 24, 1603, she collapsed and took her final breath. There was no grand speech, no final decree, just the end of a woman who had reigned like a legend and died like a shadow. And yet her final act of standing against death itself was as symbolic as her life had been. Even in her dying, Elizabeth would not let the world see her fall. But death did not grant her peace. In the days that followed, rumors spread through the royal court like wildfire, strange, grotesque stories whispered behind closed doors. According to her lady-in-waiting, Elizabeth Southwell, the Queen's corpse, sealed in a lead-lined coffin, began to swell grotesquely. Trapped within the metal, the noxious vapors from years of toxic cosmetics illness and untreated infection allegedly caused the body to bloat until horrifyingly it burst. The tale sounds too macabre to be true, and perhaps it is. Southwell later converted to Catholicism, a religion Elizabeth had persecuted, casting doubt on her testimony. But the rumors stuck, and perhaps that's because deep down they echoed a truth the court could never say aloud, that the woman who had seemed immortal in life had finally violently decayed. There was one more disturbing detail. Just days before her death, Elizabeth's physicians had begged her to remove the coronation ring she had worn for 44 years, a symbol of her marriage to the nation. It had embedded so deeply into her flesh that it had to be surgically extracted, but she died before they could begin. Even in death, the crown marked her cut into her. She had belonged to England completely until the very end. In the end, Queen Elizabeth left behind more than a throne. She left behind a myth built on endurance, brilliance, and unbearable sacrifice. Her 45-year reign gave England a golden age: political stability, naval dominance, cultural flourishing. But beneath the triumphs was a woman consumed by the price of perfection. She had no husband, no children, No heir to carry her name, only a carefully crafted image held together by lead mercury and silence. Her beauty was an illusion, her strength a performance, and her death a slow unraveling behind closed doors. Today, with modern science, we can trace the poisons that corroded her skin and broke her body. But we must also trace the deeper poison and impossible standard of female power that demanded flawlessness, immortality, and solitude. Elizabeth's story is not just historical, it is human. It forces us to ask, what are we still willing to sacrifice to be seen as strong? How many layers do we wear to conceal our cracks? Her greatest legacy may not be empire or glory, but the reminder that even a queen can be destroyed by the very image she creates. She died a monarch, yes, but also a woman aching to be more than just a symbol. She ruled like a legend, but died like a warning. Behind the crown, behind the white mask and crimson lips, was a woman slowly vanishing beneath the weight of what the world demanded her to be. Elizabeth I gave England greatness, but at the cost of her own body, mind, and soul. Her story is not just one of royal power, but of human pain hidden behind perfection. And maybe that's why we still whisper her name, not because she was untouchable, but because she wasn't. In the end, the Virgin Queen was not immortal. She was only ever desperately human.